This is part 7, the final part of the active shooter response training that was prepared for the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. And Michael Melton is the instructor making this available. And in this part, we'll be talking about the emergency management tactics that I believe are applicable to an active shooter incident for preparedness. In the 2 emergency management tactics, we'll primarily talk about the risk management process, and I'm using a Department of Homeland Security library document on the essential guide to protecting critical assets. We'll also talk about response management back to the basics. The risk management process has 5 steps. One step is prioritizing the assets. Well, in many risk assessment situations, there could be assets of valuable property or assets of even digital property or assets of a structure. But in this case, the asset is the person's life safety. That's number one. The threat is part 2 of this 5-step process, identifying and analyzing the threat. What's the active shooter's capability? Vulnerabilities, identifying vulnerabilities. What are the gaps in security? What are the limits to your abilities? Those are the step 3 of the process. Determining the risk. Risk is a factor of asset, threat, and vulnerability. And so we'll talk about identifying the risk to determine how much that threat could exploit the vulnerability to adversely impact the asset in an active shooter situation. And the final step is identifying and selecting countermeasures that can be used to protect the asset from damage by the threat. Those are the actions that will lessen the risk. So, for the very first step, the priority, as we stated, life safety is the number one priority. And really, in most law enforcement and security practices, life safety is number one. But especially in the active shooter situation, it's your life safety. Now, if you happen to be in a hospital environment where you're responsible for patients, or if you happen to be in a school environment as a teacher or an administrator where you're responsible for the safety of young students, it's a more complex circumstance. If you're with your family and you're, of course, as a parent, responsible for the safety of your children, it's more complex. But it's still life safety as number one and your safety as paramount, because you can't be of any benefit to anyone else if you're either wounded or, worst case scenario, killed. So you have to put your safety as number one, followed by the safety of students, family, parents, etc. The second step is to identify and analyze the threat. Identifying, that's the easy part. Analyzing, that's the more complex part. The threat is the active shooter, but the other part of the threat is the active shooter's weapon. Sometimes more than one weapon. Sometimes there's a vehicle involved, sometimes there's a knife involved, sometimes there's an improvised explosive device involved. So you have to consider the possibility of multiple weapons from that threat. Motive can be considered. We saw in the FBI definition that it might be random, but it might also be targeted victims. It might be a terrorist attack, as was the case with the San Bernardino incident. It could be starting out as a criminal incident where Maybe even greed was the motive, but due to circumstances, it shifted to an active shooter event where the shooter was behaving in a state of desperation. It could be a circumstance where there's mental illness or uncontrolled anger, and it could be a situation where the shooter is suicidal. Those can have an influence because if the incident is involving a suicidal person, a mentally ill person, or a terrorist, you can anticipate that traditional means of deterrence, uh, such as risk of being identified, risk of being apprehended, may not have the same impact on those individuals as would be the case with a more traditional criminal. The other analysis of the threat is the analysis of the shooter's weapon. What kind of weapon is involved, especially if we're talking now the type of gun? Long gun, you have rifle and shotgun, versus short gun or handgun, you have pistol, semi automatic usually, or revolver, but you could also have small pistols such as a Derringer. And then for the gun's action, you have the semi auto, meaning one shot every time you pull the trigger. Very seldom do you come into contact with suspects who have automatic weapons, means it continues shooting as long as the trigger is pulled. In the Las Vegas incident, they were using a bump stock, and the shooter was using a bump stock. I use the term they, but it was an individual using bump stock, and that made the gun shoot as if it was fully automatic, even though it was semi automatic. A revolver has a cylinder that contains the bullets. A pump action, you pump the slide each time you reload and expel the old round and put in the new round. Bolt action, you work the bolt or cycle the bolt with your hand each time. And then there's break action where you release the mechanism of the gun, the barrel opens from the firing area and load shells in that way. So different types of firearms have different capabilities. The semi-auto is typically going to have the highest capacity of bullets, highest capacity of rapid fire and shooting for an extended period of time. A revolver is more likely to be anywhere from 5 to 7 shots before it has to reload. A pump could be up to possibly 15 shots if it was a pump with a rifle cartridge like a 380, but it could also more likely be if it was a shotgun and a maximum of 5 to 8 shots. Bolt action, more likely 5 shots maximum, and break is quite often maximum 2 shots for a double barrel, but could also be a single shot. So these factors weigh into how rapidly the shooter can fire, and in some degree how accurately, because a rifle is typically going to be more accurate at distance than a shotgun or a pistol. But another factor is that a long gun may be easier to wrestle out of the suspect's hands or divert the barrel away from yourself if you're close than would be true of a pistol. But ideally, you don't want to get so close that you're able to actually see what weapon is in the suspect's hands. So, what are the indicators of the type of gun that don't require you to actually see the weapon? If you hear the ejected shell casings hitting the floor and you're hearing a large metal object or a large plastic object, then chances are the large metal object is a rifle, the large plastic object is a shotgun shell. If you're seeing shiny objects, those are typically metal, and that would indicate rifle or handgun. The colorful plastic shells are more likely to be shotgun shells. The timing, very quick repetition of shots versus seconds of delay between 5 or 6 shots. The timing would indicate that it's a semi-auto if it's very rapid, or possibly a revolver, or a pump or bolt action if it's 5 or so shots between reloading. The impacts of the bullets. One hole from a bullet is likely to be something other than a shotgun. Many holes from one shot fired is likely to be a shotgun. The brake action and pump or slide, they both make a distinctive sound. So you could hear the sound. Now, the brake, in the case of the Seattle, Washington shooting, the suspect had to break open the gun, and John Meese saw that, but may have heard that indicated the suspect was reloading, and that's when he chose to make his move to disarm the suspect. So you can identify a lot of things about a weapon, even if you're not seeing the weapon, but you're seeing where the shots impact, or you're seeing or hearing the casings or the action of the gun. The last step of this identifying and analyzing the threat is analyzing the shooter himself, the shooter's ability to move and react, the shooter's ability to hit his desired target. Is he shooting or appearing to shoot indiscriminately into crowds, or is he picking out individual targets from some distance away and shooting them? Also, physical size may indicate a level of ability to physically fight, which could be something important if you were going to try to physically resist the shooter. The third step of this process is identifying the vulnerability, the gaps in security. There's physical security gaps, such as the structure. Is the structure an open floor plan? Are there extensive windows? Is there an inability to secure rooms, such as you didn't have the ability to lock the room from the inside, or the door opens to the inside? Both of those are more difficult to secure than a door that opens to the inside is easier to secure than a door that opens outward, because you can barricade the door that opens to the inside. Security from process. So if there's standard operating procedures for different types of operation, such as a guard on duty or required to wear badge, those are excellent for deterring a suspect or potentially detecting the suspect. However, if you are forced to have direct public access in your circumstance, or there's no guard or law enforcement at your facility, ID cards aren't required, that's a standard operating procedure that creates a gap. Finally, your own individual or personal vulnerabilities. What are the limits on your vision, your mobility, your hearing, your physical strength, your fighting skills, personal confidence, self control, prior preparations? Those are potential vulnerabilities that will impact the effectiveness of your response. So you want to be at least conscious of those as part of this 5-step process. Determining the risk. Again, risk is a function of threat, vulnerability, and consequence to the asset. So, what is the likelihood that the particular threat will be able to take advantage of a vulnerability to impact adversely the asset? And no single risk assessment gives a full picture of potential harm, because the number of variables are quite high. So you want to have an overall understanding of this and be able to update it, but you're not going to do a full risk assessment and know everything. You must be prepared to act on the information that's available to you at the time and then adjust as necessary, similar to what we talked about with the OODA loop. So the final step is selecting the countermeasures that you will employ in a specific incident. What are the security measures, such as activating an alarm, making a notification, seeking security within a pre-identified safer room? What are the threat interventions, such as positioning barriers or finding good weapon or cover, ensuring that you have full concealment, the lights are off, the sounds are off, etc. And finally, what will take place regarding any interaction with others who happen to be near you in terms of their uh, addition to your security or perhaps distraction from your security. And finally, your defensive tactics. Highly aggressive physical actions include use of available options as improvised weapons or distraction devices, and acting effectively as either a committed individual or part of a group's assault. So, those are the risk assessment, risk management strategies. Now we'll go to the back to the basics post. So POST involves that's the acronym for priorities, objectives, strategies, and tactics. So you'll see that there's a little bit of an overlap with the other information we've done with the POST process, such as the POST priorities. So priority is life safety. We've talked about that. You have the LIP acronym, life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. That's a security acronym for three things that you want to protect. But will incident stabilization really be your responsibility in an active shooter event? Not unless you're security or law enforcement. Incident stabilization is a desired outcome. It's something you want to think about if you happen to have an opportunity, such as access to a weapon that can immobilize the suspect. But incident stabilization is really a law enforcement and security concern. Your priority is life safety. And then your objective, your desired outcome of your objective is don't get shot. But if you do get shot, survive. Take, for example, the young lady that walked down the stairs and walked toward the shooter in the Seattle College video. She did get shot, but she did not just fall down and bleed to death. She took responsibility for her own welfare and showed great resilience by turning and walking out of that building and seeking medical care, which saved her life. You want to have objectives with the understanding that your objectives will be influenced by the threat and the situation circumstances, and those are subject to change. So understanding that don't get shot, if you get shot, survive, is probably as clear as you can go. But obviously you might want to make an objective, if you're with your children or with students, that you also protect those charges from being shot or fatally injured. Then the third element of the POST acronym is strategies. Run, hide, fight, or combination of those are the three strategies. But within those strategies, now you get down to the tactics. And your tactics are your countermeasures and your actions that you take to protect yourself. The threat's urgency, the availability of resources, the time that's allowed, the constraints to your actions, such as if you're limited to where you could obtain exits or that sort of thing, if you're limited to what kind of preparation you can carry to work. Maybe your work does not allow you to have pepper spray. Perhaps it does. your preparedness in terms of having pre-identified your different tools for these actions. And again, we're going to get to the tool of the personal action plan in just a minute. Your preparedness in having pre-identified escape routes and pre-identified safer rooms comes into play. And then your willingness to act effectively as opposed to possibly being a panicked person who doesn't take the initiative to take care of their own welfare. You really have to determine that you're going to do whatever it takes to survive. So now, as we combine these two in bringing this all together, you have the similarity between the risk assessment process, where you identify your priorities and your strategies dependent on the circumstances of the situation, and then your tactics are finally your countermeasures. You have the similarity of these two processes with the OODA loop process. And all of this comes to one additional incident emergency management strategy, which is the incident action plan. In emergency management, you use situational awareness and common operating picture to develop goals that are the highest level, objectives the next level, strategies the next level, and task the fourth level there. Then once you know what task you're going to execute, then you need the resources for that task. That's the decision of the planning P of an incident action plan. Then you take those actions, you evaluate, adjust, and repeat that process. And that's consistent with the OODA loop in using evaluation. So you can see how the strategies of military and law enforcement can be linked to the strategies of emergency management to give you a greater number of options in your toolkit for various types of active shooter events. In wrap up, you always must play with the cards you dealt. You're not going to be able to prepare for everything. You're not going to always have the tools at hand that you most would desire. So you're going to have to be ready and willing to play with the cards you're dealt and make the best of that situation. Whatever pre-identified action plan and resources you have done will prove to be very helpful, because hasty decisions in chaotic times are not typically going to be the best decisions. So whatever you can have pre-planned in your personal action plan and have that kind of on the front portion of your preparedness action plan, that's going to work to your advantage regardless of how challenging the situation is. The incident's timing and the shooter's actions will significantly determine which resources and decision making tools you can apply. We've talked about a wide variety of decision making tools, and you're obviously not going to be in a position in any event to use all of them. The concepts here are to have options that will work, and then you pick one such as the OODA loop that allows you to act very quickly, as Colonel Boyd did, and achieve your desired outcome ahead of any desire of the shooter to cause you injury and harm and death. So you want to take these actions expeditiously without waiting for all the facts to be known, but making the best decision you can at the moment and then reevaluating after you take that action so that you can then take the next action. But be as prepared as you can. And that's where we're going to get into a couple of tools I have developed that are available to you. The first tool is the personal action plan. So there's a link here that you can use, and you establish 3 different options for your run, your identified escape path, your destination, and the issues or concerns for that path. Then for hide, any pre-identified hiding locations and options nearest to where you normally work or normally would be located in this incident. And then fight, pre-identified improvised weapon options, items useful for throwing to distract or otherwise harm the suspect. And so this item is available for you to download and fill out for your personal action plan. And then you should review it periodically and you should update it periodically and possibly have a different personal action plan for your home versus, let's say, for your car versus for your work location. So, what you would do in your car can be different than what you would do at your work location or if you're out shopping. So personal action plans can be unique to the situation and it's that you're in, the environment you're in. And if you're doing them in advance, you might want to have one for each of your more common environments. The second tool is the safer room tool. Now, I don't call this a safe room because a safe room is typically a room that was specifically built for a purpose. This room more likely is going to be like an interior conference room or a restroom or some other room that you're able to secure the room adequately to prevent the shooter from gaining access to you and possibly a couple of coworkers or family members. So you can use this tool to examine the room structure, doors, windows, and walls, its accessibility to others like coworkers, the ability to turn off the lights if there's intercom or phone in the room, and then the interior contents of the room that can be used for barricade, improvised weapon, or cover or hiding places. So this tool is available for you to download as part of your preparation. We've taken you from the more preliminary stages of preparedness. You can see the shoes might be considered running shoes, but are not nearly as effective as the ones depicted on the guy's feet. But most importantly, the guy is wearing the shoes. There, he's, we believe, headed in the right direction, which is a very important outcome. In the hiding, we've gone from basic blending in with the environment to a complex camouflage situation where not only you have the camouflage shelter, but you also have the shelter brushed in with similar. So it's a very sophisticated hiding. And finally, from the fighting, the most primitive response of a fist to a more sophisticated, coordinated joint attack by a group of people. And hopefully, you now have the strategies to not only employ these techniques individually, but also sequentially and even in some situations simultaneously for the best defense. So now, as part 7 of this training concludes, we want to ask you for the third and final time to do your self-assessment and update your benchmark as to what you feel your ability as an individual is to control your exposure to an active shooter event. Is it none? Is it low, between low and moderate, or moderate? We want to see some movement because every one of you started at a different level of capability. And so if the course has achieved an objective, you've moved forward at least one and possibly two categories in this response toward hopefully the low to moderate as your baseline, and possibly some of you even to the moderate level of capability to control your environment in an active shooter event. Always remember, preparedness is a journey, not a destination. You need to continue to review the content and to possibly go back and refresh, update those tools that I'm providing for you. And in that way, you'll be as prepared as you can be in a real incident. The mental preparedness is key. That's the end of this final segment and the end of this active shooter response training. Thank you very much. And here's my final list of my contact information.